Is the housing market heading for a 1980s-style recession? I remember this. Louise and I, we were living in Atlanta, Georgia in the early 1980s. We started a travel agency there in 1983 and started an ad agency there in 1989. And I remember buying a house in Atlanta in the early 80s and paying 13% interest. Now the interest rates got as high as 18%. But I remember, we had a 13% mortgage. And what I remember most about that is that we got a real deal on the house. And that, I think, is what's happening right now. We're seeing the 30-year fixed rate mortgage is now at 7.79%. That's as of last week. And the Fed is meeting today. And, right now, the Fed fund rate is at a 22-year high, between 5.25% and 5.5%. And the big question is when Jerome Powell speaks this afternoon, and I don't believe he has spoken yet, but when he does speak this afternoon, is he going to be announcing a rate hike, or is he going to be announcing a pause? There's not a chance in hell he's going to announce a reduction in the Fed funds rate. So keep an eye on this, but what this is doing, the concern is that this higher mortgage rate is, number one, it's reducing the cost of homes, which for some people reduces the incentive to sell, although, again, you can buy at a cheaper price. The main beneficiaries of high interest rates like this are very wealthy people. And they're huge beneficiaries. And the reason why, and not necessarily very wealthy people, people wealthy enough that they can buy a home with cash. Now, it's probably the top 2 or 3% of Americans, but, having the ability, although, if you're selling a house, you've got enough cash, you can buy a house, I suppose. But those people who can buy a house with cash, they're not affected by interest rates, other than the fact that the high interest rates are causing the price of homes to go down. Because most people who are buying houses, now keep in mind, 22% of all houses sold last year were sold to institutional investors, big banks, hedge funds, wealthy people, foreigners, 22%. This is huge. I mean, we've never seen it this high. And we need to do something about that, frankly. But those are cash purchasers. And the cash purchasers are going to be picking up. You're going to see a higher percentage of cash purchasers this year than in previous years. But what that means is that people just starting out, like Louise and I were in the 1980s, I mean, we weren't just starting out, but we'd only been married about a decade, and it wasn't our first house, maybe third or fourth, but we were still getting our feet on the ground. And for those folks, these higher mortgage payments can be a real burden, a very substantial burden, in fact. There's Charlie Doherty, who is the senior economist at Wells Fargo, says that he believes that we are heading for a recession, a housing recession. He said this could tip the housing market into a recession that echoes the slowdown of the 1980s. After generally improving, this is from Wells Fargo's chief economist, after generally improving in the first half of 2023, the residential sector now appears to be contracting alongside the recent move toward higher mortgage rates. He said a higher for longer interest rate environment would likely not only weigh on demand, but could also constrain supply by reducing new construction and discouraging prospective sellers carrying low mortgage interest rates from listing their homes for sale. And that's a good point, too. If you've got a mortgage, if you bought your house 5 years ago and you've got a 2% or 3% mortgage, and you're looking at, if you sell it, having to buy a new house with a 7% mortgage or an 8% mortgage, that's not a good deal. So, and all of this echoes then through to our homelessness problem. We know now, this amazing study that Zillow published last year, and I've written about this several times now and talked about it on this program a couple of times. What Zillow found was that when housing in a community, when the price of housing, when the monthly cost of housing exceeds 34% of the median income of the community, you start seeing homelessness show up. And as the price goes up from that 34% threshold, 36%, 38%, 40%, 42%. As the price of housing goes up above the median household income in the community, for every increment up in that, you see a similar increment up in homelessness. In other words, homelessness is rising as the price of homes, and thus the rents are rising. Rents are a function of real estate value. So it sure looks to me like Chairman Powell's policies, I mean, maybe they're successfully reducing inflation, maybe not. I think that this inflation was an anomaly. I think it was caused by the pandemic. I think it's over. We're down in the neighborhood of 2%. That's, 3% used to be what they shot for. I think it's time for him to stop, but he's not listening to me.